I'm Damon Fairless. The public inquiry into foreign electoral interference kicks off today. The independent commission was sparked by allegations that China had interfered in Canadian elections, a bombshell accusation that ignited a major political battle in Ottawa. Opposition parties wanted an inquiry, but the Liberal government initially said no. It designated former Governor General David Johnston to investigate whether one was needed. And even though he concluded that foreign governments are trying to influence Canadian politics, he recommended against an inquiry. That sparked even more political outrage. So in September, Justin Trudeau eventually called for one. The inquiry is already facing hard questions about who gets to take part and how much of the findings can actually be shared with the public. Catherine Tunney is a CBC parliamentary reporter who covers national security. She's been following the story closely, and she's here with me now to explain. Hey, Kat, thanks for coming on Front Burner. It's good to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just start with the basics. Can you help me understand what the main goals of this inquiry are?
Yeah, Commissioner Marie-Josée Augue does not have an easy job ahead of her. It's a pretty huge mandate. One is to kind of figure out whether foreign interference happened in the past two federal elections, 2019 and 2021. And if so, to what extent did China, Russia, India, for example, and others play in meddling, and if it basically made an impact or not? So it's a pretty big question, and that's one part of her mandate. She also is looking at whether the government, not just the Liberal government, but the whole machinery of government, if it's set up in a way that can respond to foreign interference. There's lots of questions about who is talking to who, what, and how information got out. So she also has to figure out, are we set up? And she kind of has a limited runway to do this as well. We're starting this week with the inquiry. Then there's a bit of a break, and we'll hear kind of the meatier issues come March. But she has an interim report that's due in May, and then her final report is due by the end of the year. She has a huge mandate, and she does have a pretty crunch timeline to do this.
So most of the public focus has been on China and Russia, but then we learned last week that India is going to be included in the inquiry as well. So we've covered the allegations that India was linked to the killing of a Sikh activist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, here in Canada, and then also the U.S. allegations that it was behind an assassination plot there in the States. So I guess what I'm curious about is, do you have a sense of specifically what the inquiry wants to look at when it comes to India?
We know that the commissioner is, asking for more information. This is something that, definitely those in the Sikh community and others too have raised. If you're looking at China and Russia, we also have concerns about India, and always the mandate that she has said, China, Russia, and others.
Justice Augue will be tasked with examining and assessing interference by China, Russia, and other foreign states and non-state actors, including any potential impacts, to confirm the integrity of and impacts on the 2019 and 2021 general elections.
Others is doing a lot of work in that sentence. So now we have a clear sense that India is going to be, at least we're asking for information. Obviously, we'll have to see, how big or small a role and who's going to come and talk about that. We know from reporting that there's been questions about Iran's interference, North Korea. So it'll be interesting to get a sense of how long she's going to spend on all those countries. But for sure, kind of why we are here in the first place is because of media reporting from the Globe and Mail and Global, and that really focused on China's interference. The rural. Allegedly, of course, all of this is based on anonymous sources and leaked documents. But, it talked about how China wanted to see a liberal minority government in the last election. And that, of course, is what happened. And there's also lots of questions about China's alleged interference in candidate nominations and how big of a role they were playing there. So, yeah. Undeniably, China is probably going to be the biggest player here, but let's not forget that China is not the only player when it comes to foreign interference, especially foreign electoral interference. So it'll be interesting to see what else she gets to cover.
it's been kind of a long and winding road to get to this inquiry. The Liberal government has, it's resisted this inquiry. But I kind of want to go back to what you mentioned, that the reports that were coming out over the last couple of years, alleging certainly Chinese interference, but other countries as well. Can you take me back there and let's go through these reports? What are the substance of these reports?
Yeah, well, some of the main ones is that China, one, allegedly played a role in the nomination process, as in, before we even get to voting in a main election, we have to choose who's going to be a candidate, for the Liberal Party or for the Conservative Party, for example. And there was reporting that to suggest that China was playing a role in that and perhaps handpicking candidates. Allegations that the players, one of them being now independent MP Han Dong, has denied.
He allegedly, in February 2021, told a Chinese diplomat that Beijing should hold off on freeing Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, the two Canadians it was holding imprisoned, because that would favor a conservative government returning to power. Now,
what has been reported is false, and I will defend myself against these absolutely untrue claims.
There has been lots of questions about the nomination period. Is a little bit more of a Wild West situation, if you will, unlike, the general election. So there's always been some eyebrow raising about nominations, and there's suggestions in those reports that China kind of seized on that. And then also perhaps some of the, one of the biggest bombshells was the Globe and Mail's reporting about, how China had a plan, and there was conversations about wanting to make sure that certain conservatives were not elected. We've heard, reports from, a conservative MP, Kenny Chu, who said he was seen on WeChat, a very popular communication platform, that he was being targeted, and he always has felt that China was behind that.
Chu says Beijing spread propaganda about him being anti-Chinese within the Chinese-Canadian community.
They target specific candidates such as myself.
All of those kind of put together kind of led us to these questions about what did the Liberal government know, and did they act fast enough? And that's, really kind of, we saw that boil over in the House of Commons earlier last year.
Will he allow Canadians to get to the truth and prevent this from happening again before the next election with a full public inquiry now?
A public inquiry that has been worked on by all different parties, that is agreed to by everyone, so it doesn't hopefully descend in the kind of toxicity and disagreements that we saw this spring, will demonstrate clearly the responsibility of other countries to cease their interference activities.
And then, it was a long and winding road, but here we are with the inquiry kicking off today.
Okay, so and I guess before I get into that, can you give me a sense of what how China in particular, with some of the other countries who are alleged to have interfered in our election process, how have they responded?
China always has denied that this is going on, and come out and said that we don't do this, that we're not interested in Canadian affairs, and we don't interfere in Canadian affairs, and believes that or at least says that the government and sources have made this up. So that's what they've stand behind that for a while. Russia also has denied allegations.
Going back to this, long and winding path to get to the inquiry, it's taken a while. One of the things that happened was that the government initially resisted opposition to call this inquiry. They brought in the former Governor General David Johnston as a special rapporteur on foreign interference to investigate it. Can you take me through that? So how do we make the turn out of that into this formal inquiry?
Because politics. So David Johnston, he was appointed the special rapporteur, and he looked at some of these allegations that were on the table, and ultimately he was told to, you can suggest an inquiry, and the Liberal government said that they would listen to that and heed what he had to say. Ultimately, he said that he did not feel like there should have been an inquiry.
A further public process is required, but there should not and need not be a separate formal public inquiry. A public inquiry examining the leaked materials could not be undertaken in public. given the sensitivity of the intelligence.
It's hard to have these conversations out in the open when you're dealing with such, heightened national security concerns. And then there's a whole slew of laws of protecting classified information. So that was part of his reasoning about, I don't really know how much further we can have this conversation given all of those limitations. But because of, the Conservatives definitely seized on the fact that he had some long family ties to the Trudeau government.
He's named his neighbor, family friend, ski buddy, and member of the Beijing Finance Trudeau Foundation to look into the matter, which is nothing more.
And they, immediately kind of cast him as this person who can't be trusted and perhaps is protecting his old family friends. Mr. Johnson, said, he came at this with clear, open eyes. But ultimately, he said that this is just so political that I have to kind of tap out.
My objective was to help build trust in our democratic institutions, he wrote. But he added, given the highly partisan atmosphere around my appointment and work, my leadership has had the opposite effect. I am therefore tendering my resignation.
In that aftermath, there wasn't really there was a lot of heat and there wasn't really much place to go. And then the Liberal government, with the opposition really coming at them, decided to go this way, to go with an inquiry, and the parties got to help weigh in on the parameters and who the commissioner would be.
The Government of Canada, with the support of all recognized parties in the House of Commons, will appoint the Honourable Marie-Josée Hogg, a judge of the Court of Appeal of Quebec, to lead a public inquiry established under the Inquiries Act.
That's kind of how we're getting to where we are. And it will be interesting this week. Their main question is how do we have these conversations?
This inquiry is looking at really big geopolitical issues, right? Which is obviously a big part of this. But I want to talk about the human element too, because actual people, individuals have been targeted here. They're in the crosshairs of this. So there's going to be testimony from victims of foreign interference, and I just want to get a sense of some of the stories that have emerged over the last few years.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we think foreign interference and espionage, you think the dossiers and the meeting people and in parking garages, but there are people in Canada who have we know through either their testimony before parliamentary committees or reports that have come out, and CSIS itself, the spy agency, has also alluded to the fact that there are people here who have felt intimidated, have been blackmailed by China specifically, told you're here in Canada, but your grandparents are still in China, and if you don't do X, we will do Y. So there is the threat of intimidation and backlash is something that many people have felt. So hopefully we can hear those stories in the inquiry. I think there is definitely a push to hear those. Now, that being said, if you're feeling already intimidated, then I think that, of course, is concerned about how do you tell that story in such a very public forum, one that for sure the Chinese embassy will be tuning into. So there's will have to be a balance on how we figure out how to weigh all of that.
So you and I, we're talking on Sunday afternoon. The inquiry starts its public hearings on Monday, so that's today for folks listening today. But before that gets rolling, the first matter of business in the inquiry is determining, I guess, what we can and can't talk about publicly. So break it down for me. What are the challenges there?
One of the issues that we've had trying to understand this full story is that, there are leaked documents and there are sources who have told certain stories, but I don't think we have the full picture of what's going on. And, we've seen the head of CSIS, for example, the head of the RCMP, go to committees, parliamentary committees, and they'll answer a little bit of a question. And then there's probably something that you've heard over and over and over again, which is, due to national security concerns, due to the ongoing investigation, I can't answer that question. We keep kind of coming up this wall. And let me tell you, as a reporter, it is very frustrating to give CSIS some credit. Yes, you don't want to necessarily show your full hand, especially when you're dealing with these geopolitical issues and the fact that we're active investigations. But I think there's also a disservice that's happening because we have some reporting, snapshots of certain cases, but we don't have the full picture, right? So I think, I think rightfully Canadians have a lot of questions about what or what did not happen in the past two elections. So on top of that, there are laws, the Security of Information Act, which, people who take that oath are not allowed to talk about what they know for their entire lives. Like that's how serious, national security concerns are. And there's the Canada Evidence Act. Again, all of this is trying to protect, to make sure that, human sources are protected,
Right.
that Canada's secrets are protected. Hopefully, we'll by the end of the week or soon after, we'll get a sense about are we actually going to be able to move forward and have a deeper conversation? Are we going to start to get at least, if not the full picture, a much more colored in picture about what's happening, or is it going to be like ultimately, maybe she will decide that in order to get to the bottom of it for a report, she'll have to have behind closed doors meetings with the players, and then the public and the media, of course, is essentially locked out. And I think that's where some of the frustration will happen. Like it'll feel like we're on a hamster wheel, where we're not moving past this.
There's basically a needle to be thread here, right, between the facts we need to have a meaningful public inquiry, but also the secrets we need to keep in order not to give away, issues of national security. So, really at the heart of this is intelligence and CSIS, which is, basically the institution that exists to keep secrets, secret intelligence, right? So I guess specifically when it comes to figuring out what we can talk about in this inquiry, what can we expect to hear from CSIS? Like what kind of transparency do you think we can expect?
I can tell you what I hope to expect.
Sure.
Obviously, as a reporter, you want all the information. I mean, I will say I have spent a little bit of time with David Mignot, the head of the agency. And I would like to think, and I do kind of sense that CSIS is slowly changing, and that it wants to have these conversations. So my hope as a journalist is that, and hoping for Canadians as well, is that the agencies see this as a moment to okay, let's have a mature conversation about this, and let's at least try to tell Canadians the whole story, because people are going to fill in either way. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see if that happens.
You mentioned politics before. That's not gone away, even with in this current iteration of this question we're dealing with. So I'm really not familiar with the various standings of each of the political parties and how at the inquiry. But as I understand, the Conservatives aren't happy about the process because they haven't been given a full standing in the hearings. Can you help me understand that? What do they want exactly?
Yeah, so in an inquiry, and we saw this in the Emergencies Act inquiry last year as well. If you have a certain level of standing, you get to ask questions. You get to basically cross-examine some of the witnesses. You get to present certain evidence as well. So there was a lot of people who were seeking, party standing, and not everyone got it. The Conservative Party being one of them, and they made the point that we are a party whose own members, we believe have been targeted by China, right? So they're quite upset and believe that because of that they won't get that this inquiry is somewhat tainted.
Mhm.
We'll point out that their Michael Chong, their MP, who is this major player in this story, because of reporting that told us that China was targeting his family overseas because of stances he was taking in the House of Commons with the Uyghurs, and there was a whole fallout because he didn't even know that, and basically until the reporting was close to being done.
Global Affairs Canada announcing they detected false narratives about Chong's identity, political stances, and family's heritage on the social media platform WeChat, and saw a coordinated network of WeChat accounts featured, shared, and amplified a large volume of false or misleading narratives about Mr. Chong.
His case especially raises questions, one, about interference and, that question of intimidation and targeting, but two, about how did he not know? How did he not know until the story came out? And, the Prime Minister and then the National Security Intelligence Advisor also said that they only learned about that recently. So how does that flow of information work? So that case specifically, it represents a lot in this inquiry. He does have standing, but clearly the Conservatives feel, we're talking about electoral interference, so that we should have party standing, and ultimately the commissioner did not go in that direction.
And how does that compare to the other parties?
So the NDP also does not have that party standing. The Conservatives and the NDP have what's called interveners status. They're not completely blocked out, but it's different.
So I guess before I let you go, the one question that stays with me is if as we've talked about earlier, top civil servants have said that attempted election interference may have happened, but it wasn't enough to make a difference one way or another in the 2021 election. I guess if that's the case, then is this inquiry even needed? Why is this inquiry needed?
One part of that answer would be that this is the will of Parliament, that ultimately the opposition parties kind of banded together, and the Liberals agreed, and that's why we're here. And the will of Parliament is something that's very important. I think other people would hear that question and say, like, yeah, why are we here? And this is going to cost money. And if you like David Johnston or not, he did put out a report that also kind of echoed some of that. But I think we're in a spot that is just so gray, so confusing, so political. Even if this inquiry will be tainted by politics as well, because it's hard not to be. People might not believe it at the end, but it'd be nice to have kind of a definitive report from what's supposed to be an independent inquiry that's heard from all the players, that's had people being cross-examined, that's looked at evidence that perhaps has never been seen before, and to put a final report that's due by the end of this year on the record. I do see positives in that, and I think that will be important. That being said, people might read it and take away different things, but I think it will be important for this conversation to have kind of that on the record, and hopefully much of the inquiry will be public. You can watch it live or watch a news segment about it. And I think that also will be important for Canada as we kind of figure out what happened.
Kat, thanks so much for coming on to talk about this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Damon Fairless. Thanks for listening to Front Burner. I'll talk to you tomorrow.